The line at security checkpoint B7 stretched longer than usual, a writhing mass of bodies, appendages, and mechanical parts that moved with exhausted resignation. Elias Monroe watched them through half-lidded eyes from his station, his finger hovering over the rejection button that had become his most frequent companion during 12-hour shifts. Next, he called out, the words so automated it had lost all meaning. A tall, slender figure approached his station. Unlike most travelers who passed through with self-assured strides, this one moved cautiously, as if testing the floor beneath each footstep. She wore threadbare clothes that might once have been of decent quality, but now hung loosely on her frame. The subtle luminescent patterns on her skin, a characteristic of Illyrian species, pulsed weakly under the harsh fluorescent lighting of Zenith Station. Behind her, partially hidden, was a small child. Even with the hood pulled low, Elias could see that the child's features were unusual, neither fully Lyrian nor anything else immediately recognizable in the galactic register. The child clutched at the woman's clothing, eyes darting nervously around the checkpoint. Identification and transit purpose, Elias intoned, not bothering to look up from his console. I have work authorization. Her voice trembled slightly as she slid a worn data chip across the counter. My name is Lyra. This is my son, Kale. Elias inserted the chip into his scanner with practiced indifference. The screen immediately flashed red, displaying a series of warnings and flags. Invalid authorization, he said, already reaching for the rejection stamp. Your species designation shows anomalous markers, and your work permit is flagged as potentially fraudulent. Additionally, your son's biometric signature isn't registered in any Alliance database. He glanced at the child again, noting the way the station's lights seemed to bend oddly around him. Standard procedure requires immediate reporting to station security for further questioning. Lyra's luminescent markings dimmed with fear. Please, she whispered, leaning forward. We've traveled so far. I can work? Anything. Maintenance, waste disposal, radiation cleaning. Jobs no one else wants. Her hands trembled as she pulled her collar slightly aside, revealing a nasty burn scar that looked deliberate rather than accidental. We can't go back. They'll find us. Elias paused, his finger hovering over the alert button. It was a familiar story, one of thousands he'd heard during his 3 years at this post. Everyone had a sad tale, a reason they deserved special treatment. He'd learned to tune them out, to become a living extension of the system he served and secretly despised. But something about the way the child, Kale, stared at him gave Elias pause. The boy's eyes held wisdom beyond his years, and for a brief, disorienting moment, Elias thought he felt something brush against his consciousness, like a question without words. Behind them, the line was growing restless. His supervisor would notice the delay soon. Elias glanced at his terminal again. The rejection protocols glowed red, awaiting his confirmation. But beside them, almost forgotten, was the system maintenance override, a function he'd only used twice before, meant for correcting glitches in the identification system. With a quick series of keystrokes, Elias bypassed the security flags. Technical error, he muttered loud enough for nearby colleagues to hear. Scanner's been acting up all morning. He printed a temporary access card, the lowest clearance possible, just enough to access the station's industrial sectors where labor was always needed and questions rarely asked. Temporary work authorization, he said, sliding the card across the counter. Sector F-12, Maintenance Division. Report there within 2 hours. Don't be late, and don't wander into restricted areas. He kept his voice cold and administrative. This error will need to be corrected within 72 hours. Report back then. Lyra stared at the card in disbelief, then at Elias, her markings briefly pulsing with a color he'd never seen before. Thank you, she breathed. Next, Elias called out, already looking past her to the impatient traveler behind. As they hurried away, Elias felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest, something between unease and satisfaction. He told himself it was nothing more than indigestion from the synthetic coffee, that he'd simply save himself the paperwork of a full security report. It was just this once, he assured himself. No one would notice. No one would care. He had no idea how wrong he was. Sector F-12 existed in a perpetual twilight of steam vents and flickering lights, far removed from the gleaming corridors of Zenith Station's commercial and residential zones. Here, the station's less presentable functions operated ceaselessly: waste reclamation, atmospheric scrubbing, drone repair, and the endless maintenance of aging systems that kept the massive structure functioning. Lyra had found work immediately. No questions asked beyond whether she could handle caustic materials without protective gear. Delirium biology's natural resistance to toxins made her ideal for jobs that would sicken most humanoid species. She worked double shifts whenever possible, moving between drone repair during station day and ventilation cleaning during station night. Their accommodations matched their status: a converted storage room barely large enough for 2 narrow cots, with pipes that hissed and groaned throughout the sleep cycle. But it had a functioning lock and was situated in a neglected corner where security cameras had long since failed. Kale rarely left their small room. When he did, Lyra ensured he wore clothing that concealed most of his features, particularly the faint, shifting patterns that occasionally manifested across his skin when his emotions ran high. 2 weeks after their arrival, Elias found himself staring at an anomaly report on his terminal. The automated system had flagged unusual access patterns from a maintenance worker's ID, one he immediately recognized as the card he'd issued to Lyra. According to the logs, the card had been used to access environmental control subsystems, drone programming interfaces, and data archives, all technically accessible with a maintenance credential, but an unusual combination that had triggered an automated flag. Standard procedure required immediate reporting and credential suspension. Elias hesitated, then quietly entered his override code, marking the report as a known system diagnostic. The flag disappeared from the queue. It was the third such alert he'd suppressed in the past 14 days. His curiosity, however, was growing. What was she looking for in those systems? Was she some kind of spy? A saboteur? The thought made his stomach knot, not just for the station's safety, but for his own complicity. After his shift, instead of heading to his quarters in the mid-level residential block, Elias took a maintenance elevator down to F-12. He told himself he was just being cautious, protecting the station and himself from potential threats. But another part of him, one he rarely acknowledged, simply wanted to see her again. The industrial sector was as dismal as its reputation: all exposed conduits, rumbling machinery, and the persistent smell of recycled air fighting chemical cleaners. Workers in stained uniforms moved with the slow, methodical pace of the chronically exhausted. He spotted Lyra at a drone repair station, her slender fingers moving with surprising dexterity as she replaced damaged components in a maintenance bot. Even in the harsh industrial lighting, her skin carried a subtle luminescence, marking her as unmistakably non-human despite her attempts to blend in. Elias positioned himself behind a large atmospheric processor, watching. For nearly an hour, she did nothing suspicious, just the focused, efficient work of someone desperate to keep their job. As his shift had ended, he had changed out of his security uniform into nondescript civilian clothes, allowing him to observe without drawing immediate attention. He was about to leave, feeling foolish for his paranoia, when Lyra suddenly tensed. She casually glanced around the workroom, then extracted a small device from inside the drone she was repairing. With quick, practiced movements, she connected it to her work terminal, downloaded something, then replaced the device inside the drone's housing. Elias frowned. That was definitely not standard maintenance procedure. He was considering confronting her when an alert blared throughout the sector. Not a security alert, but a shift change notification. Lyra disconnected from her workstation, secured the drone, and hurried toward the exit along with a stream of other workers ending their shifts. Curious and concerned, Elias followed at a distance. Instead of heading toward the general workers' quarters, she took a series of service corridors, doubling back several times in a pattern that suggested she was checking for pursuit. The behavior of someone with something to hide. Eventually, she arrived at an abandoned storage section, an area scheduled for renovation that had been overlooked for years due to budget reallocations. Elias hung back as she entered a nondescript door, waiting several minutes before approaching. He stood outside, listening. Through the thin metal, he could hear voices, Lyra's and a younger one that must belong to Kale. They spoke in a language his translator couldn't decipher, their tones urgent but affectionate. Elias raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What was he doing? If he found evidence of sabotage or espionage, he'd be required to report it, and his own career would be finished for having enabled their entry in the first place. If he found nothing, he'd be revealing that he'd followed her like some obsessed stalker. Before he could decide, the voices inside fell silent. The door slid open, and Kale stood there, looking up at him with those unervingly intelligent eyes. "You can come in," the boy said in perfect standard. "Mother said you'd find us eventually." Stunned, Elias allowed himself to be ushered into the small room. It was spartanly furnished, but meticulously clean. Lyra stood at the far end, her posture rigid with tension. "Security Officer Monroe," she said quietly. "Have you come to arrest us?" "I'm not here officially," Elias replied, uncomfortable under their joint gaze. "But I've been covering up system flags about your access patterns. What are you looking for in the station archives and drone programming?" Lyra exchanged a glance with Kale, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, she gestured to a crate that served as a chair. "It's a long story," she said, "and not one I expected to share with anyone on this station." "I have time," Elias said, sitting cautiously. "And if I'm risking my career by covering your tracks, I deserve to know why." Lyra nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I'm searching for safe passage, a transport that won't require standard registration, headed somewhere beyond Alliance jurisdiction." She held up a hand as Elias opened his mouth. "Not to commit crimes, to survive." She pulled back her sleeve, revealing more of the burn marks he'd glimpsed at the checkpoint. These were made by Helix Corporation researchers. They're systematic, not random. Identification markers for test subjects. Elias felt a chill. Helix was one of the largest biotech conglomerates in the Alliance, with facilities on dozens of worlds and stations. They were known for pushing ethical boundaries in their research, but outright human experimentation. "I was a xenobiology researcher," Lyra continued. "I studied interspecies genetic compatibility, purely theoretical work. Then I met Kale's father, an energy specialist from the Vale Nebula Systems. We fell in love, married against both our cultural norms. When Kale was born," she trailed off, looking at her son with an expression of fierce pride and fear. "I'm a hybrid," Kale said matter-of-factly. "The first viable one between our species." "Which shouldn't have been possible," Lyra added. "Our genetic structures are fundamentally different." But somehow, she shook her head. "When Helix discovered Kale's existence through routine medical scans, they approached us with offers. When we refused, the offers became threats. Then my husband died in an accident at his energy facility. They took us," Kale said, his young voice suddenly old. "For research. Mother helped us escape when they transferred us between facilities." Elias looked between them, processing the implications. "And these system access attempts?" "I need to find a way off this station that won't trigger identity scans," Lyra admitted. "And I need to determine which outbound vessels might be heading beyond Alliance space." "The drone access." She hesitated. "It was to create a small distraction if necessary during our escape." "Not sabotage," Elias pressed. "Nothing dangerous," she insisted. "Just enough to redirect security attention briefly. We don't want to harm anyone." Elias ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. "Do you have any proof of these claims about Helix?" Lyra's expression hardened. "Only these." She gestured to her scars, and what they did to Kale. She looked at her son, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The boy stepped forward and rolled up his sleeve. The skin beneath seemed to shift, not just in color, but in substance, becoming temporarily translucent, revealing not blood vessels, but tiny filaments of pure energy coursing beneath. "They called it quantum biology," Kale said as Elias stared in fascination. "They think I can manipulate energy fields with my thoughts." "They're right," but I can't control it well yet. The glow faded, his skin returning to normal. They want to weaponize it. Elias sat back, mind racing. If true, he could understand why a corporation like Helix would go to extreme lengths to recapture such a valuable research subject. The military applications alone would be worth billions. I need time to think about this, he said finally. In the meantime, be more careful with your system access. Use this instead. He pulled out a security bypass card, a restricted tool issued to security personnel for emergencies. It won't trigger the same flags, but I'm trusting you not to abuse it. Lyra took the card carefully. Why are you helping us? You don't know us. It was a question Elias had been asking himself since that first day at the checkpoint. Maybe I'm tired of being part of the system that processes people like data points, he said finally. Or maybe I just want to sleep at night, knowing I didn't send a mother and child back to torture in the name of corporate profits. As he left their hidden quarters, Elias wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his career or the first truly meaningful choice of his life. 3 days later, an alert rippled through Zenith Station's security networks. A priority transmission from Helix Corporation security forces flagged for immediate action. A specialized recovery team was en route to the station, authorized with Alliance-level clearance to apprehend fugitive research assets. The transmission didn't name targets, but the biometric identifiers attached to the alert were enough for Elias to recognize who they were hunting. More concerning was the classification. The fugitives were designated as genetically unstable and potentially hazardous, justifying extreme retrieval methods if necessary. They would arrive within 12 hours. Elias downloaded the alert details to a secure personal device, then systematically erased all evidence of Lyra's and Kale's presence from the main security database. It wouldn't stop Helix's team for long, but might buy precious time. He made his way to F-12 as quickly as possible without drawing attention, cursing the lumbering inefficiency of the station's transit system. When he finally reached the maintenance sector, he found it an unusual disorder. A section of atmospheric regulators had malfunctioned, causing workers to cluster around emergency repairs. Lyra wasn't at her station. Fighting rising panic, Elias navigated through service corridors to their hidden quarters, only to find the door ajar and the room empty. Their few possessions were gone, the space sanitized of any evidence they'd ever been there. Had they already been captured? Or had they somehow received warning and fled? A soft sound from a ventilation shaft made him freeze. Slowly, Elias turned to see a small grate sliding open, revealing Kale's face in the darkness. "Officer Monroe," the boy whispered. "Mother said you might come looking for us." "There's a Helix retrieval team coming," Elias said urgently. "We have maybe 10 hours before they dock." "Where's your mother?" "Setting up our contingency," Kale replied, climbing out of the duct with surprising agility. "We detected unusual communication patterns on the security channels. Mother thought it might be about us." The boy led Elias through a maze of maintenance tunnels, some barely wide enough for an adult to navigate. They emerged in a disused cargo handling area, where Lyra was busy modifying what appeared to be an automated transport drone, one of the larger models used for moving supplies throughout the station. She looked up sharply at their approach, tension visible in her luminescent markings before she recognized Elias. "You know," she said. It wasn't a question. Elias nodded. "Helix recovery team, arriving in approximately 10 hours. They have top-level security clearance and a hazardous material designation for you both, which gives them authorization to use lethal force if they deem necessary." Lyra's hands stilled on the drone she was modifying. "Sooner than I expected. Our plan isn't ready." She gestured to the half-disassembled machine. "This was meant to transport us to a cargo vessel in 2 days, one with faulty biometric scanners that wouldn't immediately flag us." "We need a new plan," Elias said. "And I think I might have one, but you're not going to like it." Over the next hour, they formulated a desperate strategy. With Elias's security credentials, they could access more restricted areas of the station, but his ID would leave a trail that Helix's team would eventually discover. Once they moved, there would be no going back for any of them. "You don't have to do this," Lyra said, quietly while Kale worked on reprogramming a security drone they'd acquired. This isn't your fight. You could walk away now, deny any knowledge. Elias laughed bitterly. My security codes are all over the system modifications I've made to hide you. Even if I wanted to pretend ignorance, they'd find evidence linking me to you. Besides, he added, surprising himself with a certainty, I don't want to walk away. As they worked, Elias found himself observing the interaction between mother and son. Despite their circumstances, there was a deep bond evident in every glance, every brief touch. Kale, despite his youth, worked with the focus and precision of someone far older, occasionally guiding Lyra through technical adjustments with gentle patience. How old are you, really? Elias asked Kale during a brief pause. The boy looked up, those uncanny eyes meeting his directly. 7 standard years, he replied. But mother says my neural development follows a different pattern. The researchers called it accelerated cognitive mapping in their reports. They wanted to understand how his mind integrates 2 fundamentally different biological systems, Lyra explained, not looking up from her work. How consciousness exists at the intersection of conventional biology and quantum states. And they couldn't just ask, Elias said bitterly. Lyra's expression darkened. Not when the answers would be worth trillions in military applications. Imagine soldiers who could disrupt energy shields with a thought or interface directly with quantum computers in real time. The implications were staggering and terrifying. No wonder Helix was willing to go to such lengths. Their preparation time evaporated quickly. Security alerts indicated the Helix vessel had received expedited docking clearance and would arrive in just 4 hours, less than half their original estimate. They must have pulled significant political strings, Elias muttered, checking the docking schedules. That bay was reserved for an Alliance diplomatic vessel. We need to move now, Lyra insisted. Ready or not. Their plan was dangerous in its simplicity. Using Elias's security credentials, they would access a maintenance shaft that connected to the station's external repair systems. From there, they could reach a secondary docking ring where supply vessels and service craft were moored. With luck, they could commandeer a small maintenance vessel, not designed for long jumps, but enough to reach a nearby trading outpost where questions were less common than bribes. The first part went smoothly. Elias's credentials got them through 3 security checkpoints without incident, though each scan left digital breadcrumbs that would eventually lead pursuers directly to them. They moved through rarely used service corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares where facial recognition systems operated continuously. They were making good time when the station's alert system suddenly blared to life. Security alert. Unauthorized access to Section E14 environmental controls. All personnel initiate containment protocol Theta 7. Elias froze. That's not about us. We're nowhere near E14. No, Lyra said, her expression grim. That's my distraction. I programmed it to trigger if specific security protocols were activated. Which means they're already here, Elias finished. The Helix team must have boarded early. They increased their pace, Kale keeping up with surprising endurance. The environmental alert would redirect many security resources, but not all of them, and certainly not the specialized Helix team. They had just reached the access point to the external maintenance tunnels when a voice called out behind them. Security, Officer Monroe. Unusual location for an off-duty excursion. Elias turned slowly. At the far end of the corridor stood Captain Vega, his direct supervisor. She was alone, her hand resting casually near her sidearm. Captain, Elias acknowledged, positioning himself slightly in front of Lyra and Kale. I've been reviewing some interesting security logs, Vega said conversationally, taking a step forward. Quite a pattern of overrides and system glitches these past weeks, all traced back to your credentials. I can explain, Elias began, though he had no idea what explanation could possibly suffice. I'm sure you can, Vega replied. Just as I'm sure our friends from Helix Corporation can explain why they've brought armed forces onto my station under the guise of a research recovery operation. Her eyes flicked to Lyra and Kale, though I suspect I'm looking at the reason. Elias tensed, ready to attempt something desperate, when Vega raised her hand. "Stand down, Monroe. If I wanted to detain you, I'd have brought a team." She sighed heavily. 30 years in station security, and Helix thinks they can march on my station, flash some corporate credentials with Alliance stamps, and start issuing orders like they own the place. She took another step forward. "I don't know what they want with your friends, and frankly, I don't care. What I do care about is jurisdiction and proper procedure, neither of which has been followed here." Vega reached in her pocket and withdrew a data chip, tossing it to Elias. "Service Vessel Authorization. Bay 22C. Small maintenance craft with enough range to reach Proxima Trading Post. Recently serviced, full fuel cells." Elias caught the chip, stunned. "Captain, I don't understand." Vega's expression hardened. "What I understand is that Helix security operatives entered my station under false pretenses, bypassed standard quarantine protocols, and are currently deploying unauthorized surveillance countermeasures throughout my jurisdiction. That constitutes a serious security breach that will require my full attention for at least the next 6 hours." She looked pointedly at Lyra. 6 hours should be sufficient time for a standard maintenance vessel to reach safe distance. Wouldn't you agree? Lyra's markings pulsed with shock and gratitude. "More than sufficient, Captain." "Good." Vega turned her attention back to Elias. "I expect your resignation on my desk tomorrow, Monroe. Your violation of security protocols cannot go unpunished." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, "though I suspect you'll be difficult to locate for the disciplinary hearing." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, calling over her shoulder, "Environmental alert in E14. All available security personnel report immediately." They stood in stunned silence for a moment before Lyra broke the spell. "We need to move. Now." The external maintenance tunnels were cramped and cold, designed for drones rather than human passage. They crawled through in single file, Elias leading, Kale in the middle, and Lyra bringing up the rear. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow, making the metal walls look as though they were slick with blood. They had almost reached the secondary docking ring when the tunnel abruptly shuddered. A deafening metallic groan echoed through the confined space as the entire passageway seemed to flex. "What was that?" Elias shouted over the noise. "Someone's overriding the maintenance tunnel configuration," Lyra called back, her voice tight with fear. "They're trying to seal us in or flush us out." Another violent shudder ran through the tunnel, nearly dislodging them from their precarious position. Ahead, Elias could see a junction point where the passage split in 3 directions. "Which way?" he called back. "Left," Lyra shouted. "The other routes lead to dead ends or drone repair bays." They scrambled forward as quickly as possible in the confined space. Behind them, Elias could hear the ominous sound of sealing pressure doors. Someone was systematically closing off their escape routes. They reached the junction just as another door began to descend ahead of them. Elias lunged forward, wedging his body into the gap, using all his strength to hold it open as Kale scrambled through. "Hurry!" he gasped as the mechanism ground against him, threatening to crush his ribs. Lyra slipped through the narrowing gap, then helped pull Elias through just as his strength gave out. The door slammed shut behind them with a final, reverberating clang. They found themselves in a small antechamber that connected to the secondary docking ring. Through a viewport, they could see a row of maintenance vessels and small cargo shuttles tethered to the station. "Bay 22C, Elias panted, consulting the station schematic on his device. "It's 3 berths down." They moved cautiously onto the docking ring, aware that the relative openness left them exposed after the confined protection of the maintenance tunnels. The area seemed deserted, not unusual for a secondary docking area during shift change, but the absence of even maintenance drones felt suspicious. Bay 22C contained exactly what Captain Vega had promised, a small, utilitarian maintenance vessel. Its hull was scarred from micrometeorite impacts and hard use, but the engine housing gleamed with the telltale shine of recent servicing. Elias inserted the authorization chip into the external access panel. The airlock cycled open with a pressurized hiss. Get inside, he urged, keeping watch on the docking ring. I'll finish the launch sequence. Lyra and Kale had just stepped into the airlock when a voice rang out across the docking area. That's far enough. 3 figures in unmarked black uniforms had entered the far end of the docking ring. Their leader, a tall woman with an augmented targeting eye, held a weapon that hummed with barely contained energy, a neural disruptor, military grade, and highly illegal on civilian stations. Asset removal team, Helix Corporation, she announced coldly. You are interfering with the retrieval of dangerous research materials. Step away from the vessel and place your hands on your head. Run, Elias said quietly to Lyra. Get the ship started. I'll hold them off. You can't, Lyra began. Go. Elias pushed her fully into the airlock and slammed his fist on the interior cycle button, sealing Lyra and Kale inside the ship while he remained outside. He turned to face the Helix team, raising his hands slowly. I'm unarmed, he called out, taking a deliberate step away from the vessel. Let's talk about this reasonably. The leader gestured sharply, and her 2 companions spread out, moving to flank Elias. Station Security Officer Elias Monroe, she said, her augmented eye whirring as it focused on him. You violated at least 17 Alliance security protocols and interfered with a corporate retrieval operation. The penalties for such actions are severe. Probably, Elias agreed, continuing to move slowly away from the ship, drawing their attention with him. Behind him, he could hear the maintenance vessel's engines beginning their startup sequence. But I've reviewed Helix's authorization, and it specifically mentions research assets. People aren't assets, no matter how special their biology might be. The woman's expression remained impassive. Philosophical distinctions are irrelevant to this operation. The female subject, and especially the hybrid child, represent billions in research investment and incalculable military potential. They will be returning with us. That's where you're wrong, Elias said, noticing the ship's exterior lights coming online. Just a few more moments. They're not going anywhere with you. The leader's patience visibly thinned. Enough delays. Secure him, she ordered her companions. The 2 operatives moved forward confidently, clearly expecting minimal resistance from a station security officer. They were unprepared when Elias activated his shock baton, a standard security tool that he'd modified well beyond regulation specifications during his years of boredom on duty. The first operative dropped with a strangled cry as the baton connected with his torso, delivering a charge strong enough to temporarily disrupt his nervous system. The second was more cautious, drawing a compact stun pistol. Behind them, the maintenance vessel's engines roared to full power, its docking clamps disengaging with metallic clangs. The Helix leader swore, swinging her neural disruptor toward the ship. Elias lunged forward desperately, knocking into her and sending the shot wide. The energy pulse hit a nearby control panel instead, exploding in a shower of sparks and smoke. Pain exploded across Elias's back as the second operative fired his stun pistol. Muscle spasming, Elias fell to his knees but managed to swing his baton in a wide arc, catching his attacker across the legs. Both went down in a tangle of limbs. Through watering eyes, Elias saw the maintenance vessel, now fully detached, maneuvering slowly away from the docking ring. The Helix leader was re-aiming her disruptor, compensating for the ship's movement. With his last coherent thought, Elias grabbed a loose pipe that had fallen during the earlier explosion and hurled it at the docking ring's emergency protocol panel. The impact triggered the station's automatic defense system, designed to protect against decompression events, and massive shutters began descending across the exterior viewports and weapon-vulnerable areas. The leader's shot went wild as the shutters blocked her line of sight. By the time they reacted and overrode the safety protocol, the maintenance vessel had vanished into the darkness of space, accelerating rapidly away from the station. Elias felt a curious sense of peace as the stun pistol's effects overwhelmed his system and darkness closed in. The last thing he saw was the Helix leader's face, contorted with cold fury as she stood over him. Elias awoke to the sterile white ceiling of a detention cell. The neural blockers around his wrists prevented him from moving his arms more than a few inches, though his legs were unrestrained. A medical monitor beeped steadily nearby, suggesting he'd been unconscious long enough to warrant medical attention. A camera in the corner tracked his movements as he painfully levered himself into a sitting position. His head throbbed, and his muscles ached from the stun pistol's aftereffects. The cell doors slid open, revealing Captain Vega. She dismissed the guard with a gesture and entered alone, her expression unreadable. "You look terrible, Monroe," she said without preamble. "Feel worse," Elias croaked, his throat dry. "How long?" 18 hours. Vega checked the medical readout. Neural disruptor backwash. "You're lucky to be coherent." Elias attempted a smile that felt more like a grimace. The ship. Vega's expression gave away nothing. No sign of the stolen maintenance vessel. Helix deployed 2 pursuit craft, but there was an unfortunate navigation beacon malfunction that broadcasted incorrect coordinates for several hours. She shrugged. These old stations, always something breaking down. Relief washed through Elias like a physical force. They'd made it, or at least had a fighting chance. "You're in considerable trouble," Vega continued. "Assaulting corporate security personnel, sabotaging station systems, aiding fugitives. Helix wants you transferred to a corporate detention facility for extensive questioning. And you're here to process the transfer?" Elias asked, resignation settling over him. He'd known the consequences when he made his choice. Vega considered him for a long moment. "No, I'm here because Zenith Station has filed a formal complaint against Helix Corporation for unauthorized weapons deployment, falsification of security credentials, and attempted abduction of station maintenance personnel." Elias blinked in confusion. According to station records that have been thoroughly verified by 3 independent system administrators, you were conducting a routine inspection of a maintenance vessel with 2 station employees when Helix operatives illegally attempted to seize the craft for corporate purposes. Vega's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "We take jurisdiction very seriously here." "Captain, I don't understand." "You don't need to understand, Monroe. You just need to corroborate the official record." When Alliance investigators arrive in approximately, she checked her wrist display, 30 minutes. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "The corporation has grown too powerful. They think their contracts with the Alliance make them untouchable. Time someone reminded them they're not." She straightened. "So that's the situation, Monroe. You help us build our case against Helix, and in return, you face internal disciplinary action rather than corporate rendition. Seems like a fair trade." Elias stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Yes, Captain. I'll cooperate fully with the investigation." "Good." Vega moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Before our guests left in such a hurry, the boy left something for you." She reached into her pocket and placed a small object on the bed beside him. "Said you'd understand when the time was right." After she left, Elias examined the object, a small data crystal of unfamiliar design, its interior swirling with tiny motes of light that seemed to respond to his touch. He closed his fingers around it, wondering what message Cale had left him. 3 weeks later, Elias stood before the Alliance investigative panel, his testimony the final piece in a diplomatic storm that had engulfed Helix Corporation. The unauthorized deployment of military-grade weapons on a civilian station had opened doors to other investigations, revealing a pattern of corporate overreach that had gone unchecked for too long. Captain Vega's strategy had worked better than anyone anticipated. While Helix would survive the scandal, corporations that size always did, they'd been dealt a significant setback. More importantly, their pursuit of Lyra and Cale had been officially suspended pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. As for Elias, the disciplinary action had been largely symbolic, a formal reprimand and demotion. But remaining on Zenith Station no longer appealed to him. The place felt empty somehow, as though something vital had departed with the small maintenance vessel. He had spent hours studying the crystal Cale had left, attempting to access whatever data it contained, but remained enigmatic, active yet unreadable by any technology available to him. His resignation from station security was processed without fanfare. With his savings and a modest severance package, he booked passage on a transport vessel bound for the outer colonies, where Alliance influence was tenuous and corporate reach even more so. The journey would take weeks, passing near the Proxima trading post, the likely first destination of Lyra, and Kale if they'd escape pursuit. It was a long shot, he knew. They'd have every reason to keep moving, to disappear into the vast, unregulated expanses beyond Alliance space. Still, he found himself on the observation deck as they approached the trading post, scanning the chaotic collection of vessels, habitats, and makeshift structures that orbited a dwarf star too insignificant to warrant an official name. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" said an elderly woman who had joined him at the viewport. "Like a city built from spare parts and desperate dreams." Elias nodded absently, his attention caught by a small vessel departing from the trading post's central hub. There was something familiar about its profile, the utilitarian design of a station maintenance craft, modified with aftermarket parts. "Interesting little ship," the woman remarked, following his gaze. "Been docked here for repairs nearly a month. Just got clearance to depart." Elias's heart quickened. "Do you know where it's headed?" The woman shrugged. "Not officially, but rumors suggest the drift colonies in the SETI expanse. No alliance, no corporations, no questions, just people trying to make a fresh start. The drift colonies, a scattered network of independent habitats and small outposts. It made sense as a destination for fugitives seeking anonymity. Our vessel isn't scheduled to stop here, is it?" Elias asked, an idea forming. "No, just passing through the shipping lane." "But," the woman gave him a knowing look, "the transport pods are inspected at each port. Maintenance crews often take short excursions. Sometimes they're delayed, miss the departure window. Happens more often than you'd think." Elias turned to her, suddenly suspicious. "You seem to know a lot about irregular departures." The woman's weathered face crinkled in amusement. "Retired transit coordinator. 40 years managing the flows of people between worlds and stations." She gestured toward his bag, where the edge of the data crystal was just visible. "That's drift colony tech, you know. They use them as navigational markers, encoded to specific genetic signatures. Very clever system. Impossible to forge or track by conventional means." Elias's hand moved unconsciously to the crystal. "How do you?" "The boy has unusual eyes," she said softly. "Kind, but old somehow. He said you might need directions." She pressed a small device into Elias's hand. "Maintenance inspection in 20 minutes. Pod 7 has a faulty seal that will require closer examination. The inspector will be delayed by an unexpected scheduling conflict." Before Elias could respond, she walked away, disappearing into the crowd of passengers. 20 minutes later, Elias stood in the empty maintenance pod, watching through the viewport as the transport vessel receded into the distance, continuing its journey without him. The landing at Proxima Trading Post had been surprisingly simple, the promised inspection providing the perfect opportunity for an unremarkable departure. The trading post was as chaotic up close as it had appeared from a distance, a bewildering maze of interconnected structures, repurposed vessels, and hastily constructed habitats. People of dozens of species moved through crowded corridors, conducting business, arguing over prices, or simply surviving another day on the edge of civilized space. The device the elderly woman had given him pulsed with a soft light when oriented in specific directions, a simple but effective compass. Elias followed its guidance through the labyrinthine trading post, eventually reaching a small docking bay in a neglected lower section. The maintenance vessel he'd spotted earlier was there, its engines humming in pre-launch preparation. As he approached, the entry hatch cycled open. Kale stood in the doorway, those remarkable eyes lighting up with recognition. "You're late," he said with the seriousness of a child playing at adulthood. "Mother calculated your arrival for yesterday." "Had to take the scenic route," Elias replied, his throat suddenly tight with emotion. "Is there room for one more passenger?" "We saved your seat," Kale said, stepping aside to reveal Lyra in the pilot's position, her nimble fingers dancing across the controls. She turned, her luminescent markings pulsing with a warm glow. Officer Monroe, or is it still security officer? Just Elias now, he said, stepping into the ship. I seem to have misplaced my career. Lyra's expression softened. We never meant for you to sacrifice so much. I didn't sacrifice anything worth keeping. Elias placed his bag on an empty seat. Besides, I've been thinking about a career change. The drift colonies might need someone with security experience. Cale took his hand, examining the data crystal that Elias still carried. You figured it out. Not entirely, Elias admitted. I had some help. The boy smiled enigmatically. The right people find each other, even across stars. He placed his small hand over the crystal, and it responded immediately, glowing more brightly and projecting a navigational chart into the air between them. A path to the drift colonies, encoded to respond only to their specific biological signatures. Ingenious system, Elias murmured. Dad designed it, Cale said quietly. Before everything happened. He said path should be visible only to those meant to walk them. Lyra's expression flickered with old pain, quickly masked. We should depart. The trading post authorities are easily bribed, but their memory improves with each passing hour. The launch was smooth, the small vessel slipping away from the trading post with minimal notice. Just another unremarkable craft departing the bustling hub. Once clear of the immediate traffic, Lyra activated the main drive, and they accelerated toward the distant stars where the drift colonies awaited. As the trading post diminished behind them, Elias felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The rigid structures of his former life, the rules, regulations, and hierarchies that had both confined and defined him, seemed to fall away, replaced by an unfamiliar sensation of possibility. It won't be easy, Lyra said, as if reading his thoughts. The colonies are harsh places, minimal resources, constant challenges. We'll be building a life from nothing. Not from nothing, Elias countered, looking between her and Cale. From freedom. That seems like a solid foundation. Cale had moved to the viewport, his unusual eyes reflecting the starscape before them. I can feel them, he murmured. The pathways between stars, like threads connecting everything. His small hand pressed against the transparent surface, fingers splayed as if reaching for something only he could perceive. For a brief moment, Elias thought he saw faint lines of energy, like Cale's internal patterns, extending from the boy's fingertips outward toward the distant stars, a delicate web of connection and possibility. He's growing stronger, Lyra said softly, moving to stand beside Elias. His abilities developing faster than either of us anticipated. In the colonies, there are others like him, not identical but similar. Children of mixed heritage whose gifts defy conventional understanding. Away from corporate laboratories, they're learning to channel their abilities naturally. Hey, community, Elias murmured. The beginnings of one, Lyra agreed. Species who were told they were incompatible, finding connection anyway. Biology adapting where society refused to. She glanced at him. It won't be what you're used to. Good, Elias said firmly. What I was used to stopped making sense a long time ago. The journey to the drift colonies would take weeks, traversing forgotten shipping lanes and navigating unmarked passages to avoid detection. The small vessel was cramped, its amenities minimal. But as the three of them settled into the rhythms of space travel, Elias discovered a sense of belonging that had eluded him throughout his years on Zenith Station. Cale's boundless curiosity kept them entertained during the long stretches between navigation points. The boy absorbed information with remarkable speed, asking penetrating questions about everything from station security protocols to the philosophical underpinnings of Alliance governance. In return, he shared glimpses of his unique perspective, descriptions of energy patterns he could perceive, invisible to ordinary senses. Lyra gradually relaxed her vigilance, though old habits of caution remained. She spoke of her homeworld, a planet of crystalline forests and bioluminescent oceans that she hadn't seen in over a decade, of meeting Cale's father, an energy specialist whose revolutionary theories had made him both celebrated and suspect in academic circles. Of their brief happiness before Helix's interest had shattered their lives. "We'll never be completely safe," she admitted one night, as they shared a simple meal in the vessel's tiny common area. "Helix may be temporarily hindered, but corporations have long memories when profitable research is involved. So we stay alert," Elias replied. "Build networks, establish warning systems. Your son isn't the only one they've tried to exploit, I'd wager. There must be others with similar stories." "There are," Kale confirmed, looking up from a technical manual he'd been studying. "I can sense them sometimes like echoes. Different frequencies, but harmonious." 3 weeks into their journey, they received the first communication from the drift colonies, a tightly encrypted message acknowledging their approach and providing final navigation coordinates. The first visual confirmation came 2 days later, a sprawling collection of linked habitats, repurposed ships, and ingeniously constructed living spaces, all orbiting a rogue planetoid rich in mineral resources. Unlike the chaotic jumble of Proxima Trading Post, the drift colonies displayed an organic organization, structures arranged in patterns that seemed to follow invisible energy flows. As they approached, Lyra opened a communication channel. "Drift Colony Nexus, this is Starpath requesting approach guidance. We carry 3 passengers, including a registered Pathfinder." The response was immediate. "Starpath, this is Nexus. Welcome home. Transmitting approach vector now." "Registered Pathfinder?" Elias questioned. Lyra smiled. "Their term for children like Kale. They can navigate the quantum pathways between stars that conventional sensors can't detect. It's how the colonies remain connected despite being scattered across sectors." The docking process was surprisingly smooth for such an unconventional structure. They were met by a small welcome committee, a diverse group whose mixed heritage was evident in their varied physiological characteristics. The leader, a tall woman with subtle energy patterns flowing beneath translucent skin, approached Kale first, kneeling to his eye level. "Welcome, young Pathfinder," she said warmly. "I'm Serene, colony coordinator. We felt your approach for days." Kale replied with surprising formality. "Thank you for receiving us, coordinator. My mother, Lyra of the Crystal Forests, and our protector, Elias of Zenith Station." Serene looked up at them both, her gaze lingering on Elias with frank assessment. "A station security officer, an unusual companion for fugitives." "Former security officer," Elias clarified. "And they're not fugitives here, are they?" A smile spread across Serene's features. "Perceptive. No, here they're simply colonists, like any other." She rose gracefully. "Come, let us show you your new home." The colony defied Elias's expectations. Despite its cobbled-together appearance from the outside, the interior spaces were thoughtfully designed, with gardens growing in zero-gravity chambers, communal spaces that fostered interaction, and private dwellings built to accommodate the specific needs of diverse physiologies. "We began as refugees," Serene explained as she led them through the main habitat ring. "Experiments, accidents of nature, corporate discards, those whose existence challenged the categorical thinking of the Alliance systems. Over time, we discovered strengths in our differences. They were assigned a modest dwelling in a section populated by newer arrivals. The space was small but well-designed, with separate sleeping areas and a common room, facing an expansive viewport that captured the majestic sweep of the colony structure against the backdrop of stars. "It's perfect," Lyra breathed, her luminescent patterns glowing with emotion. "It needs work," Serene acknowledged. "But so does everything worthwhile." She turned to Elias. "Your security background will be valuable here. We have systems, but they need refinement. If you're willing, there's a place for you on the colony's protection detail." "I'd be honored," Elias replied, surprised by the immediate acceptance. "And you," Serene addressed Lyra, "your experience in xenobiology would strengthen our medical research. We have facilities, limited but growing." "Research without exploitation," Lyra mused. "I'd almost forgotten such a thing was possible." Serene's expression turned serious. "Make no mistake, the challenges here are significant. Resources are limited, and the Alliance pretends we don't exist only so long as we remain beneath notice. But we are building something important here, a society where difference isn't merely tolerated but understood as essential. After Serene departed, the three of them stood in silence, absorbing the reality of their new home. "Well," Elias said finally, "it's certainly not Zenith Station." Lyra laughed, a sound he realized he'd rarely heard before. No regular shifts, no security protocols, no commercial sectors. "Whatever will you do with yourself?" "Learn," Elias replied simply. "Build. Protect." He looked at Kale, who was already exploring their new dwelling with characteristic curiosity. "Be part of whatever comes next." In the days that followed, they settled into the rhythms of colony life. Elias joined the protection detail, helping to design security measures that balanced safety with freedom. Lyra's expertise was welcomed in the medical research facility, where she worked with other scientists studying the unique biological adaptations of the colony's diverse population. Kale joined a small group of children with similar abilities, learning to harness his gifts under the guidance of elders who understood his unique nature. Each day, he returned with new discoveries, his eyes alight with the joy of unbounded exploration. 6 months after their arrival, Elias stood on an observation platform at the colony's outer ring, watching a new vessel approach. Another refugee ship guided by the quantum pathways that only Pathfinders could navigate. Lyra joined him, her hand finding his with comfortable familiarity. "Another arrival," she noted. "The 4th this month." "Word is spreading," Elias replied. "People seeking alternatives to Alliance conformity or corporate control, or simply a place where they can exist without explaining themselves." Lyra rested her head against his shoulder, her luminescent patterns synchronizing with his biorhythms in the way that still fascinated him. Their relationship had evolved gradually, built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than desperate circumstances. The transition from allies to something deeper had felt as natural as the colony's organic growth. "Do you ever regret it?" Lyra asked quietly. "Everything you left behind." Elias considered the question seriously. "I think about the people sometimes, Captain Vega, a few colleagues. But the life itself," he shook his head. "It was empty. I was just another component in a system I didn't believe in, enforcing rules that serve power rather than people." Below them, Kale emerged from the Pathfinder Training Center with his cohort, their young faces animated as they discussed something with intense concentration. Occasionally, faint patterns of energy would flicker between them, a nascent communication method they were developing, unlike anything documented in Alliance scientific records. "They're the future," Elias said, nodding toward the children. "Not just Kale or the Pathfinders, all of them. A generation growing up without the artificial boundaries we accepted as normal." The arriving vessel completed its docking procedure, and they watched as the new refugees took their first steps into the colony, faces showing the familiar mix of wariness, exhaustion, and fragile hope that Elias now recognized easily. "I should go," he said. "The protection detail helps with new arrivals." Lyra nodded. "And I should check if medical needs assessment." Yet neither moved immediately, taking a moment to appreciate the vista before them. The elaborate structure of their adopted home, set against the vast backdrop of space, a small but significant experiment in redefining what community could mean. "It's strange," Lyra said thoughtfully. "When we first met, all I wanted was a job. Any job, to keep us alive one more day. I never imagined." She gestured toward the thriving colony around them. "Sometimes survival is just the beginning," Elias replied. "What comes after is up to us." As they finally turned to attend their respective duties, Elias reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a chance decision at a security checkpoint to a new life among the stars. Not a perfect life, certainly. The colony faced constant challenges, resource limitations, technical failures, the ever-present threat of discovery by those who would exploit their differences. But it was a life of purpose and connection, built on the simple recognition that compassion could be more powerful than conformity. That sometimes breaking the rules was the only way to discover better ones. And as he watched Kale race toward them, eyes alight with new discoveries and untapped potential, Elias knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice.